The judgment came before the drink service. It was a subtle thing, a tightening around the flight attendant's smile, a glance that lingered a fraction too long on the worn fabric of my hoodie. A silent calculation that filed me away under a category I knew all too well. I was just a girl, a black girl in sweats, probably flying on a discount ticket. I was not someone who mattered. They had no idea that in the belly of this Airbus A330 cruising at 37,000 feet, their neat and tidy assumptions were about to be shattered by the one thing they couldn't argue with, the undeniable life-saving truth. The hum of the engines was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Zola Imani. It was the sound of transition, the white noise that separated one chapter of her life from the next. This time, it was separating a grueling 5-day medical conference in Chicago from the promise of her own bed in San Francisco. Her brain felt like a sponge that had been oversaturated and then wrung out a slurry of new surgical techniques, data-heavy presentations, and the lukewarm coffee that fueled it all. She had presented twice her own research on congenital heart defects to rooms filled with the titans of pediatric cardiology. She had answered their probing questions with the quiet confidence of someone who lived and breathed her work. She had been Dr. Imani, a rising star from the prestigious Cleveland Clinic, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and professional envy. But now on flight UA 1847, she was just Zola. She had intentionally shed the armor of her profession. The tailored blazer and sensible heels were packed away. In their place, she wore a soft grey hoodie from her alma mater leggings and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Her hair, a cascade of intricate braids, was pulled back into a simple ponytail. She was the epitome of off-duty, a deliberate cloak of anonymity she wore to shield herself from the world. In her line of work, the weight of being on was immense. Every conversation could turn into a consult, every stranger with a tremor in their hand, a potential diagnosis. Anonymity was a sanctuary. Her seat 24B was a middle seat in economy, plus a small splurge for the extra leg room that her 5'10" frame craved. To her left by the window, a young mother was trying to placate a restless toddler. To her right in the aisle seat, a man in a crisp suit had already opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a display of self-importance. The flight crew was going through their pre-flight rituals. Zola watched them with the detached eye of a frequent flyer. One flight attendant in particular caught her attention. Her name tag read Brenda. She was a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a severe bun and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Brenda radiated an aura of stressed efficiency. She moved with a clipped, precise energy, her voice sharp, as she instructed a passenger to properly stow their carry-on. When Brenda got to Zola's row to take pre-takeoff drink orders for the premier status members nearby, her eyes swept over Zola. It wasn't hostile, not overtly. It was a quick, dismissive scan. The kind of look that said, "You're not a problem, but you're also not a priority." Zola had felt that look 1,000 times in her life. In high-end stores, in first-class lounges she had every right to be in. In the hallways of her own hospital, from patients who assumed she was there to change the bedpans. She was used to it, but it never lost its sting. She just sank a little deeper into her hoodie and pulled out her noise-cancelling headphones. The plane taxied, and the safety demonstration video played on the screens. Zola closed her eyes, her mind already drifting towards the complex case waiting for her on Monday, a newborn with a hypoplastic left heart. The ascent was smooth. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a long-haul flight. The man in the suit 24C flagged down Brenda with an impatient snap of his fingers. "Can I get a Scotch double? And I need to connect to the Wi-Fi, it's not working." His tone was demanding, as if the flight's sole purpose was his personal convenience. Brenda's professional smile was firmly in place. "Of course, sir. The Wi-Fi can be a bit spotty during ascent. It should stabilize shortly. I'll get that Scotch for you right away." She turned, and her eyes briefly met Zola's. Zola offered a small, polite smile. Brenda's response was a tight, almost imperceptible nod before she bustled away. The message was clear. Suit and tie man was a paying customer, a somebody. Hoodie and sneakers girl was just a seat filler. Zola sighed and put her headphones back on, leaning her head against the seat. She wasn't looking for a fight. She wasn't looking for recognition. She just wanted to be invisible. She just wanted to get home. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. Zola opted for the vegetarian pasta, a predictable and safe choice. As Brenda handed her the tray, her fingers brushed against Zola's. Brenda's hand was cold, her touch brisk and impersonal. "Enjoy," she said, the word clipped. The toddler by the window, finally out of steam, had fallen asleep on his mother's lap. The businessman was now on his third Scotch, his typing growing louder and more aggressive. Zola picked at her pasta, the plastic fork feeling flimsy in her hand. The air in the cabin was stale, recycled, and thick with the unspoken stories of 200 strangers suspended 7 miles above the earth. Everything was completely, utterly, and blessedly normal. It was the calm before a storm none of them knew was coming. A storm that would rip away Zola's comfortable cloak of anonymity and force her to become the one thing she was trying so desperately not to be Dr. Imani. And for one man on this flight, that transformation would mean the difference between life and death. The first sign that something was wrong was not a shout, but a sound. A wet, guttural gasp that cut through the monotonous drone of the engines. It came from a few rows ahead in the main economy cabin. Zola, who had been trying to lose herself in a dense medical journal on her tablet, pulled one headphone out. Her senses honed by years in emergency rooms and intensive care units were immediately on high alert. People shifted in their seats, heads turned. A low murmur rippled through the passengers. Then came the voice laced with panic. "Help somebody. Please, I think he's having a heart attack." The call came from a woman. Zola craned her neck and saw her a middle-aged woman with her hand on the shoulder of her husband, who was slumped in his seat. The man's face was a ghastly shade of grey, his eyes wide with a terror that Zola knew all too well. It was the look of a body betraying its owner. Immediately, the flight crew's training kicked in. Brenda was there in a flash, her voice a mixture of forced calm and genuine alarm. Sir, can you hear me?" "What's wrong?" Another flight attendant rushed over with the onboard first aid kit. The dreaded inevitable announcement crackled over the PA system. It was the co-pilot's voice, steady, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation on board. If there is a doctor or any other medical professional on the flight, please make yourself known to the cabin crew." Zola felt a jolt, a familiar and unwelcome surge of adrenaline. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she always dreaded. The moment her sanctuary of anonymity was threatened. Part of her screamed, "Stay seated. You're exhausted. You're off duty. Let someone else handle it." But the other part of her, the physician, the healer, was already moving. It was an instinct, an oath she had taken, written not on paper, but on the very fiber of her being. She couldn't sit there and do nothing while someone was in distress. She unbuckled her seatbelt, her movements measured and calm. As she stood, the businessman in 24C shot her an annoyed look. "Where do you think you're going?" "They need a doctor." Zola ignored him, her focus entirely on the scene unfolding a few rows ahead. She saw the man clutch his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow. She saw his wife's face, pale with fear. Just as she was about to step into the aisle, a man from the business class cabin stood up. He was in his late 50s, with distinguished silver hair, wearing a cashmere sweater over a collared shirt. He carried an air of effortless authority. "I'm a doctor," he announced, his voice a calm baritone that commanded attention. "Dr. Evans, dermatologist." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the nearby passengers. Brenda turned to him, her expression one of immense gratitude. "Oh, thank you, doctor. Right this way. His name is Frank, doctor." Evans moved toward the patient with a confident stride. The crew parted for him like the Red Sea. He knelt, placing his fingers on the man's wrist to check his pulse. Zola paused. She watched for a moment, her analytical mind overriding her fatigue. A dermatologist was a doctor, yes, but their expertise was skin, not the intricate electrical dance of a failing heart. This was like asking a poet to fix a car engine. He might know the basics, but he lacked the specialized tools and knowledge. Still, he was a trained professional. Maybe he could handle it. She started to sit back down, telling herself it was under control. But then she saw something Dr. Evans missed. Frank, the patient, wasn't just clutching his chest. His head was lolling to one side, and his lips were taking on a distinct bluish tinge, cyanosis, a critical sign of oxygen deprivation. His gasping wasn't the classic Hollywood heart attack. It was different. It was agonal breathing, a brainstem reflex that occurred when the heart had effectively stopped pumping blood to the brain. They didn't have minutes. They had seconds. Zola's conscience screamed at her. She stood up again, her resolve hardening. She squeezed past the irritated businessman and moved into the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Brenda turned her brow, furrowing in annoyance as she saw Zola. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We have a doctor here. Everything is under control." "With all due respect," Zola said, her eyes locked on the patient. "He's not having a standard myocardial infarction. He's in cardiac arrest. That's agonal breathing. You need to start chest compressions now and get the AED." Dr. Evans looked up from the patient, his expression a mixture of surprise and condescension. "And who might you be?" "I'm a doctor," Zola stated simply. Brenda scoffed. It was a small, sharp sound, but it was filled with disbelief. She looked Zola up and down, the hoodie, the sneakers, the braids. The image did not compute with her idea of a doctor, especially not one who was contradicting the distinguished-looking man from business class. "You're a doctor." Brenda's voice dripped with skepticism. "Honey, we have a real doctor here. Please go back to your seat. You're interfering." The word real hung in the air, a slap in the face. It was the verbal equivalent of the dismissive glance from earlier, now magnified and broadcast for everyone to hear. Zola's blood ran cold, then hot with a familiar, righteous anger. But she couldn't afford to be angry. A man's life was on the line. "His heart is not beating effectively," Zola insisted, her voice rising in urgency, cutting through the politeness. Checking his radial pulse is useless. You need to check for a carotid pulse, and you need to do it now. Get the automated external defibrillator, but don't just slap it on him. We need to know the rhythm first. Shocking the wrong rhythm can be fatal. Frank's wife looked from Zola to Dr. Evans, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. "Please," she sobbed, "just help him." Dr. Evans, his authority now challenged by this young woman in a hoodie, became defensive. "I am perfectly capable of handling this situation. He has a pulse. It's just thready. We don't need to overreact." But Zola could see it. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor in Frank's jaw. The waxing and waning of his agonal gasps. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone what was happening. This wasn't a simple blockage. This was an electrical failure. "You're wrong," Zola said, her voice now ringing with an authority that made several passengers turn and stare. "His heart is in a state of ventricular fibrillation or something far more complex. Every second you waste debating this, his brain is dying." Brenda stepped between Zola and the patient, her face a mask of fury. "That's enough. You are a passenger on this aircraft, and you will follow my instructions. Sit down now, or I will have you restrained for interfering with a medical emergency and endangering this man's life." The accusation was so perverse, so backward, it stole Zola's breath. She was being threatened with restraint for trying to save a man's life, all because she didn't fit their picture of a real doctor. The standoff was absolute. Zola, the lone voice of accurate medical truth. Dr. Evans, the picture of credibility making a critical error. And Brenda, the gatekeeper, blinded by her own prejudice. In that frozen moment as Frank's life ebbed away, Zola knew this was no longer just about saving a patient. It was about shattering a perception so dangerously wrong. It was about to become lethal. The aisle of the Airbus A330 had shrunk, becoming a claustrophobic tunnel of judgment. The faces of the surrounding passengers were a blur of curiosity, fear, and morbid fascination. All eyes were on the confrontation, Brenda, the flight attendant, standing resolute. Dr. Evans, the dermatologist, looking increasingly flustered. And Zola, the anonymous woman in the hoodie, now the focal point of a crisis she was uniquely qualified to solve. "I am not endangering his life. I am trying to save it," Zola said, her voice low and intense, each word precise. She refused to be cowed. "You have a man in cardiac arrest, and the protocol is clear: chest compressions and defibrillation. That is universal, regardless of whether you're on the ground or in the air." Brenda's lips thinned into a razor-straight line. "Dr. Evans has said the man has a pulse. I am going to trust the word of a registered physician over a hysterical passenger." The word hysterical was a deliberate gendered barb designed to dismiss her. Zola felt a flicker of white-hot rage, but immediately suppressed it. Hysteria was a luxury she couldn't afford. Frank didn't have time for her feelings. "Ask him what kind of doctor he is," Zola challenged, looking directly at Brenda, but speaking loud enough for Dr. Evans to hear clearly. Dr. Evans bristled. "I'm a dermatologist, but I completed a full medical degree and residency, I assure you. I know how to handle a basic medical emergency." "This isn't basic," Zola countered, her voice sharp with urgency. "The man is cyanotic and displaying clear agonal respirations. That is not a thready pulse, that is a non-perfusing rhythm. His heart might be quivering, but it is not pumping blood. It's a critical distinction you seem to be missing." She used the medical terminology deliberately, a test, She saw a flicker of confusion in Dr. Evans's eyes. He knew the words, but he didn't have the deep instinctual understanding that came from seeing it happen week after week in a cardiac ICU. Another flight attendant arrived, pushing the red box containing the automated external defibrillator AED. "We have the AED," she announced breathlessly. "Good," Dr. Evans said, regaining a semblance of control. "Let's get his shirt open. We'll attach the pads." "No!" Zola's voice boomed through the cabin, silencing the murmurs. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated authority, the voice of a doctor in a code blue situation, and it made everyone, including Brenda Hadel, flinch. "Do not attach that yet," Zola commanded, taking a step forward. Brenda put a hand up to stop her. Zola ignored it. AEDs are programmed to shock two specific lethal rhythms, ventricular fibrillation and pulseless ventricular tachycardia. But if he is in asystole, a flat line, or a pulseless electrical activity shocking him will do nothing. Worse, it could eliminate any chance of a spontaneous return of circulation. We need more information than that machine can give us. Brenda looked at her, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. Zola's confidence was unnerving, her technical knowledge far exceeding that of a hysterical passenger. A seed of doubt was planted. Was it possible she had made a terrible mistake? "What do you suggest we do then, Miss?" Brenda asked, her tone still dripping with sarcasm, though it was now tinged with a sliver of uncertainty. "I suggest you let me assess the patient," Zola said. "My name is Dr. Zola Imani. I am a pediatric cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic. My entire life is dedicated to the electrical and structural function of the human heart. While my patients are usually children, the physiology of cardiac arrest is the same. Now, are you going to let me help him, or are you going to write up a report later about why Frank died under the care of a dermatologist, while a cardiologist stood 3 feet away?" The cabin was dead silent. The only sounds were the hum of the engines and the patient's horrifying rhythmic gasps. Frank's wife was openly weeping now, looking at Zola with desperate, pleading eyes. The mention of the Cleveland Clinic, a name synonymous with world-class cardiac care, hung in the air. It was a weighty credential, one that was hard to dismiss, but Zola's appearance was a powerful counter-argument in Brenda's mind. Doctors, especially specialists from such a renowned institution, looked a certain way. They looked like Dr. Evans. They didn't look like this young black woman in a hoodie. The cognitive dissonance was too much for her to overcome. Brenda made a decision. She chose the reality that felt most comfortable to her. "Liar," she whispered the word, a venomous dart. Then louder for all to hear. "You are a liar. You're making this all up. You probably watched a few medical dramas on TV. You are putting on a show and risking this man's life." The accusation was stunning in its audacity. Zola felt as if the air had been punched from her lungs. She had been doubted before, dismissed and underestimated. But to be called a liar in the middle of a life-or-death emergency was a new, brutal low. It was a denial not just of her credentials, but of her very reality. "You think I would lie about this?" Zola asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think anyone would lie about this?" "I think you're an attention seeker." Brenda snapped her own fear and uncertainty, now manifesting as aggression. "You are to return to your seat now. That is my final warning. Another word, and I will inform the captain you are an unruly passenger." She turned to the other flight attendant. "Get the restraints." The threat of being physically restrained, of being treated like a criminal while a man died, was the final straw. Zola looked at Frank, whose skin was now a waxy, pale grey. She looked at his wife, whose face was a mask of despair. She looked at Brenda, whose prejudice was a literal weapon. The anger she had been suppressing coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. The time for pleading was over. The time for asking for permission was over. She was Dr. Zola Imani, and she was going to save this man's life, whether the crew helped her or not. But to do that, she needed to provide proof so absolute, so irrefutable, that it would shatter their disbelief into 1,000,000 pieces. She turned away from the scene, her movements calm and deliberate. "Where are you going?" Brenda demanded. Zola didn't answer. She walked back to row 24, her expression unreadable. The businessman in 24C watched her, a smirk on his face, as if he was enjoying the drama. Zola ignored him. She reached under the seat in front of her and pulled out her worn, unassuming backpack. It looked like a student's bag. Scuffed at the corners, a water bottle sticking out of the side pocket. It was the same bag they had judged her for. She placed it on her seat and unzipped the main compartment. Her mind was a whirlwind. "My license is in my wallet. My hospital ID. Is that enough?" They'll probably say they're fakes. They've already decided I'm a liar. I need something more. Her fingers rummaged past her tablet, her noise-cancelling headphones, a bag of almonds and a paperback novel. She was searching for one specific thing. A document she had thrown in at the last minute before leaving the conference. It was heavy, glossy, and groundbreaking. Brenda had followed her, standing in the aisle with her arms crossed, watching her every move. "What are you doing now? Looking for your fake medical school diploma?" Zola's fingers found it. The smooth, heavy paper. The sharp, right-angled corner. She pulled it out. It wasn't a diploma. It wasn't an ID card. It was the advance copy pre-publication issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious and rigorously peer-reviewed medical journals in the world. And on the cover, under the iconic red banner, was a photograph. It was a professionally shot image of a doctor with a serious, compassionate expression, holding a detailed 3D printed model of a human heart. The headline next to the photo read, "Zola Imani's Gambit, a new dawn for Brugada syndrome sufferers." The doctor on the cover was her. Time seemed to slow down. The hum of the engines faded into a distant murmur. The only sound Zola was aware of was the frantic thumping of her own heart and the crinkle of the glossy paper in her hands. She held the journal up, her gaze locked on Brenda's. She didn't say a word. She let the image on the cover do the talking. Brenda's eyes darted from the magazine to Zola's face, then back to the magazine. The confident, sneering mask she had worn throughout the confrontation began to crumble. Her jaw went slack. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallor that rivaled the dying man's. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock. A system crash of deeply held prejudice meeting undeniable reality. The woman on the cover was, without a shadow of a doubt, the woman in the hoodie standing before her. The businessman in 24C, who had been craning his neck to see, let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Zola didn't relish the moment. There was no sense of triumph, only a profound, soul-deep weariness and the cold urgency of the ticking clock. Frank was still dying. She turned the journal around for Dr. Evans to see. He had been trying to direct the other flight attendant to place the AED pads, but he paused, squinting at the cover. His face registered a different kind of shock. It wasn't just surprise, it was professional awe mixed with profound embarrassment. He knew the journal. Every doctor did. To be published in it was a significant achievement. To be the cover story was the mark of a giant in the field. "Brugada syndrome, doctor," Evans read the headline aloud, his voice barely a whisper. He looked from the journal to the patient Frank, and a horrifying realization dawned on his face. The agonal breathing, the suddenness of the collapse without typical heart attack symptoms, it all clicked into place. He hadn't been dealing with a simple plumbing issue, a blocked artery. He was in the middle of a rare, complex electrical storm. Zola finally broke the silence. Her voice was ice. Brugada syndrome, she confirmed, is a genetic disorder that disrupts the heart's normal rhythm. It causes chaotic, dangerously fast heartbeats in the ventricles, which is a form of ventricular fibrillation. It often presents in otherwise healthy adult men. It's frequently misdiagnosed as a standard heart attack. And if you shock it at the wrong moment in the cycle, you can send the patient into irreversible asystole. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I wrote the definitive paper on a new treatment protocol. I have led the clinical trial for the past 3 years. There is no one on this plane, and likely no one in the state you're flying over, who knows more about what is happening inside that man's chest than I do. Now, her voice dropped, becoming a command that tolerated no argument. Are you going to let me save his life? Brenda was speechless. She could only nod, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked broken, the foundations of her world-view shattered at 37,000 feet. Dr. Evans, to his credit, recovered quickly. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the humble deference of a student to a master. Please, he said, stepping back. Tell me what to do. How can I help? The dynamic of the entire cabin had shifted. Zola was no longer the accused. She was the commander. You, she said to Dr. Evans. Start chest compressions, hard and fast, 120 beats per minute. Think of the Bee Gees, Stayin' Alive. Do not stop until I tell you to. To the other flight attendant she said, Power on the AED, but do not attach the pads to him. I need to see the rhythm it analyzes, but I will decide whether we shock. Get me the oxygen tank and a bag valve mask. To Brenda, who was still frozen in place, she gave a direct order. Get on the horn to the captain. Tell him we have a confirmed cardiac arrest due to probable Brugada syndrome. We need to divert to the nearest major city with a level 1 trauma center and a dedicated cardiac electrophysiology lab. Find out the ETA. Go. Now. The crew, previously her antagonists, scrambled to obey. Their movements were now swift and purposeful, energized by Zola's confident command. Zola knelt beside Frank, her backpack, now her medical bag. She pushed past the journal and her personal items, her fingers finding what she was truly looking for. It was a small, hard case. She clicked it open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a sleek, handheld device, no bigger than a smartphone, with 2 thin wire leads. It was the Imani monitor, a prototype portable ECG she had developed herself, one that provided a much more detailed reading than a commercial AED. It was her baby, the physical manifestation of her life's work. She ripped open Frank's shirt. Dr. Evans was already pumping rhythmically on his chest, sweat beading on his forehead. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, he counted under his breath. Zola attached the leads from her device to Frank's chest, her movements economical and precise. A small screen flickered to life, displaying a chaotic, jagged line. It wasn't the coarse V-fib an AED would typically shock. It was a polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, a wild, disorganized electrical storm. Exactly what she had feared. Shocking it now would be like throwing a bucket of water on a grease fire. Keep compressions going, she ordered. We need to circulate what little oxygenated blood he has left. She pulled a preloaded syringe from her bag. It contained a high-concentration dose of a specific antiarrhythmic drug, one she had proven effective in her trials. An onboard medical kit would never have it. "I need to establish an IV line," she announced. But the flight attendant returned with the first aid kit, and it only had basic supplies. Finding a vein on a man in full cardiac arrest whose circulatory system had collapsed was next to impossible. "It's no good," the other flight attendant said helplessly. "We can't get a line." Zola's mind raced. No IV access meant she couldn't administer the drug that could save his life. The pilot's voice crackled over the PA. "This is the captain. We are diverting to Denver International Airport. ETA is 45 minutes. 45 minutes. It might as well be a lifetime. Frank had less than that all. It was a terrifying, seemingly impossible roadblock. They were in a race against time, and they had just hit a brick wall. The hope that had surged through the cabin only moments before began to evaporate, replaced by a new, more profound sense of dread. Zola had the knowledge, she had the proof, but she was still trapped in a metal tube, miles from a hospital, with a dying man and limited tools. Her brilliance was undeniable, but it might not be enough. The number 45 minutes echoed in Zola's mind like a death knell. In her world, the world of cardiac arrest, 45 minutes, was an eternity. Brain death began in 4 to 6 minutes. Frank was already well past that initial window, kept viable only by the continuous, grueling chest compressions being administered by a rapidly tiring Dr. Evans. "I can't keep this pace," Evans panted, his face flushed and beaded with sweat. The cashmere sweater was now a prison of heat. "You have to," Zola commanded, her eyes scanning her prototype monitor. The chaotic rhythm on the screen mocked her. She had the drug that could tame it, a silver bullet in a syringe, but no way to deliver it. The frustration was a physical thing, a burning in her chest. Brenda returned from the cockpit, her face pale. "The captain is aware. The emergency has been declared. They're clearing a flight path for us now. Paramedics will meet us at the gate." She looked at Zola, her former animosity replaced by a desperate, fearful reliance. "Is he?" "He's still with us, but barely." Zola cut her off, her mind racing through every obscure medical protocol she had ever learned. IV access was the standard. But when the standard fails, you need to think beyond it. What were the other options? Intraosseous. She needed a drill, something to go directly into the bone marrow. The plane's medical kit had nothing of the sort. Then an idea surfaced. A risky old-school technique, rarely used anymore due to the effectiveness of modern IVs, but one taught in emergency medicine for just this kind of last resort scenario. "Give me the oxygen tubing from the bag valve mask," Zola ordered the second flight attendant. "And the syringe." The flight attendant, a young woman named Maria, quickly handed them over. Zola looked at the thin plastic tube. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "Dr. Evans, I need you to pause compressions for precisely 5 seconds when I tell you to," Zola instructed. "No longer." She uncapped the syringe. She pulled an endotracheal tube from the onboard kit, a tube designed to be inserted into the windpipe to help with breathing. She didn't have a laryngoscope to see what she was doing, so intubating him blind was too risky. But she could use the tube as a conduit. "What are you doing?" Dr. Evans asked, his breathing ragged. "An endotracheal drug delivery," Zola said, her focus absolute. "We're going to push the drug directly into his lungs. The rich capillary network there will absorb it into the bloodstream. It's not as effective as an IV, But it's our only shot. She positioned herself at Frank's head. Okay, everyone ready. Maria, I want you to give 2 big breaths with the bag valve mask as soon as the drug is in. Dr. Evans, get ready to resume compressions immediately after. She took a deep breath, steadying her hands. This required precision. Okay, Evans. Stop compressions. In the sudden, eerie silence, Zola tilted Frank's head back, opening his airway. She threaded the thin oxygen tubing down the larger endotracheal tube and fed it into his throat, guiding it by feel towards his trachea. Come on, she whispered to herself. She couldn't be sure she was in the right place without being able to see, but she had to trust her anatomical knowledge. Drug is in, she yelled, depressing the plunger of the syringe, sending the life-saving antiarrhythmic medication down the tube. Bag him! Maria squeezed the resuscitation bag twice, forcing oxygen and the atomized medication deep into Frank's lungs. Resume compressions. Dr. Evans immediately started pumping again, the rhythmic thuds filling the cabin once more. Now they had to wait. It was an agonizing, helpless feeling. The drug needed time to be absorbed, to travel through the pulmonary circulation and to reach the heart. It could take a minute, maybe 2, or it might not work at all. Zola's eyes were glued to the screen of her monitor. The jagged, chaotic line continued its deadly dance. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. The hope that had flickered to life began to dim once more. Frank's wife was praying now, her rosary beads clutched in her white-knuckled hands. Her whispered words a counterpoint to Dr. Evans's grunted counts. It's not working. Doctor, Evans said, despair creeping into his voice. Wait, Zola said, her voice tight. And then she saw it. A single solitary blip on the screen that was different from the others. It was organized, a normal QRS complex. It was a sign that a single cell in the heart had listened, had tried to fire properly. Then another, and another. Slowly, miraculously, the chaotic scribble on the monitor began to resolve. The wild polymorphic tachycardia began to calm, coalescing into a more organized, steadier rhythm. It was still fast, still dangerous, but it was a perfusing rhythm. It was life. We've got a rhythm, Zola announced, a wave of profound relief washing over her. It's a sinus tachycardia, but it's organized. Stop compressions. Dr. Evans pulled back, exhausted, and stared at the monitor in disbelief. The jagged line of death had been replaced by the steady, reassuring peaks and valleys of a heartbeat. Zola immediately placed her fingers on Frank's neck, pressing against the carotid artery. She felt it. A pulse. It was thready, weak, but it was there. It was definitively, wonderfully there. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Frank's wife sobbed, but this time the sound was one of overwhelming relief. Frank's own eyelids fluttered. His agonal gasps ceased, replaced by weak but spontaneous breaths. His color, while still pale, was losing its ghastly blue-gray tinge. He was alive. He was back. Zola leaned down, speaking to him gently. Frank, my name is Dr. Imani. You're on an airplane. You had a cardiac event. You are safe now. We're going to take good care of you. He couldn't speak, but his eyes, hazy and confused, found hers. He gave the faintest of nods. Zola sat back on her heels, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a deep, bone-aching exhaustion in its wake. She had done it. Against all odds, with limited tools and in the face of humiliating disbelief, she had pulled a man back from the brink of death. Brenda stood by the bulkhead, her hand over her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face. They weren't tears of relief for the passenger, not entirely. They were tears of shame, of a horrifying self-realization. She hadn't just doubted a passenger. She had nearly been an accomplice to a preventable death. Her prejudice wasn't just an ugly opinion. It was a tangible, dangerous thing that had almost cost a man his life. The weight of that knowledge seemed to crush her. She approached Zola hesitantly, her entire demeanor changed. The stern, authoritative flight attendant was gone. In her place was a humbled, shattered woman. "Dr. Imani," she began, her voice cracking. I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. Zola looked up at her. She was too tired for anger, too drained for lectures. She simply gave a slow, weary nod. The apology was necessary, but it couldn't erase what had happened. It couldn't erase the fact that if Zola hadn't been carrying that journal, if she hadn't had that unimpeachable glossy proof in her backpack, Frank would now be dead. Her skill alone hadn't been enough. She had needed to prove her right to use it. The thought was sobering. The victory felt hollowed out by the battle she had been forced to fight just to enter the ring. She had saved a life, but she had also been given a brutal reminder of the world she lived in. The flight wasn't over. They still had to land. And the final act of this drama had yet to play out. The remaining 30 minutes of the flight to Denver passed in a state of suspended reality. The cabin, once a theater of high-stakes drama, became a makeshift recovery room. Zola, now the undisputed medical authority, orchestrated Frank's care with a quiet, focused intensity. She had him placed on high-flow oxygen. Dr. Evans, now her willing and humbled assistant, monitored his blood pressure with the cuff from the onboard kit, calling out the readings every few minutes. The numbers were low, but stabilizing. Zola never left Frank's side. She knelt in the aisle, her prototype ECG, still attached her eyes, constantly scanning the rhythm, watching for any sign of the electrical storm returning. She spoke to him in a low, soothing voice, reassuring him, telling him where he was and what was happening. His wife held his hand, her face a testament to 1,000 emotions. Gratitude, terror, love, and awe, all directed at the young woman in the hoodie who had brought her husband back. The other passengers were silent, watching the scene with a newfound respect. They had been witnesses to something extraordinary. They had seen prejudice and professionalism clash, and they had seen the latter win a stunning, life-saving victory. Zola's worn-out hoodie no longer looked like a sign of insignificance. It looked like the unassuming uniform of a hero. Brenda was a ghost of her former self. She moved through the cabin mechanically, her face etched with a deep, profound shame. She avoided eye contact with Zola, but Zola could feel her gaze from a distance. It was a look of horrified reverence. Every time Zola gave an order, "Let's elevate his legs a bit to help his blood pressure," or "Make sure that oxygen mask has a tight seal," Brenda would ensure it was carried out instantly. Her efficiency now born not of stress, but of a desperate need for penance. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on for their final descent. The captain's voice came over the PA, different from before. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a tone of sincere gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent into Denver International Airport. As you are aware, we have had a serious medical emergency on board, thanks to the swift and heroic actions of a fellow passenger, Dr. Zola Imani, and the assistance of Dr. Evans, the affected passenger is now in stable condition. Paramedics and an airline representative will be meeting us at the gate. We ask that you remain seated upon arrival to allow them to come on board. Thank you. The public naming the acknowledgement of her title and her heroism sent a ripple through the cabin. It was the official final repudiation of Brenda's accusation. Zola felt a strange mix of vindication and discomfort. She hadn't done it for the recognition, but hearing her name spoken with respect by the flight's highest authority felt like a soothing balm on the raw wound of the liar accusation. As the plane touched down on the tarmac with a gentle bump, a spontaneous sound erupted in the cabin. It started with one person, then another, then spread row by row. Applause. It was a wave of heartfelt, grateful applause directed entirely at Zola. It wasn't the polite clapping after a captain's smooth landing. It was a genuine emotional ovation. Zola, still kneeling by her patient, felt a blush creep up her neck. She simply nodded her acknowledgement, her focus remaining on Frank. The plane taxied to the gate, and the engines spooled down. Before anyone could unbuckle, 3 paramedics and a stern-looking man in a suit, the airline's ground operations supervisor, boarded the plane. Dr. Imani, the lead paramedic, asked, his eyes scanning the scene. "Here," Zola said, finally rising to her feet, her knees cracking in protest. "Patient is a 58-year-old male, probable Brugada syndrome. Suffered a witnessed cardiac arrest, received approximately 8 minutes of CPR. We achieved return of spontaneous circulation following endotracheal administration of an antiarrhythmic. He's been maintaining a sinus rhythm, but he's hypotensive. He needs a full workup and admission to a cardiac ICU with electrophysiology capabilities." The paramedic stared at her, impressed by the concise expert handover. "Dr. Imani, from the Cleveland Clinic." "The Brugada trial." Zola blinked, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" "We had a teleconference with your team last month," the paramedic said with a small smile. "Read all your papers. It's an honor, ma'am. We've got him from here." It was another layer of vindication, one that Zola hadn't expected. Here, thousands of miles from her hospital, her work, her name had preceded her. She wasn't an anonymous woman in a hoodie. She was a respected leader in her field. As the paramedics carefully transferred a conscious and breathing Frank onto a gurney, the airline supervisor approached the flight crew. His face was grim. He spoke to Brenda in a low, quiet voice that didn't carry through the cabin, but his expression was unmistakable. Brenda stood before him, stripped of all authority. She didn't argue. She didn't make excuses. She simply nodded, her face pale, and handed over her staff ID. She was being taken off duty, her career hanging by a thread. Zola took no pleasure in it. She just felt a deep sense of melancholy at the whole ugly, unnecessary ordeal. Frank's wife rushed over to Zola before they wheeled him off the plane. She grabbed Zola's hands, her own trembling. There are no words." She sobbed, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "You have no idea what you've done. He is my whole life. Thank you. God bless you." "I was just doing my job," Zola said softly, which was both true and a massive understatement. As the passengers began to deplane, many of them stopped by Zola's row to offer their own thanks, their own words of awe. "You were incredible. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen." "Thank you, Doctor." Even the businessman from 24C paused, his earlier arrogance gone. "Dr. Imani," he said, meeting her eyes. I owe you an apology. I was an ass, when Zola just nodded. Be well, she said. Finally, the cabin was empty, save for Zola, the remaining crew, and the captain who had come out from the cockpit. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes that held a deep-seated concern. Dr. Imani, he said, extending a hand. I'm Captain Harris. I cannot express my gratitude enough. You saved that man's life. I also want to offer my most profound apology for the conduct of my crew member. What happened was inexcusable. It is not what this airline stands for. A full investigation will be launched, I assure you. Thank you, Captain, Zola said, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of the last hour. Just make sure it includes training. Better training. So that the next time someone who looks like me says they're a doctor, they're believed. Her words hung in the air, a final powerful indictment of the prejudice she had faced. The captain nodded slowly, a somber understanding on his face. I will personally see to it. Collecting her backpack, the unassuming bag that had held the proof of her identity, Zola finally walked off the plane. She stepped into the jet bridge and paused, taking her first breath of air that wasn't from the cabin. It felt fresh, real. She was no longer a passenger, no longer a suspect, no longer a commander. She was just Zola again, a tired woman who wanted to go home. But she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that something within her had changed. The cloak of anonymity she had so cherished had been ripped away, and in its place was a new, heavier mantle. She had learned that sometimes being seen, truly seen, for who you are, was not a burden, but a life-saving necessity. The story of Dr. Zola Imani on Flight UA 1847 isn't just about a medical emergency at 37,000 feet. It's a powerful and raw reminder of the snap judgments we make about people based on what they wear, their age, their gender, or the color of their skin. Zola was a world-class expert, a literal lifesaver. But in the eyes of the crew, her hoodie and her braids made her a liar. She was forced to prove not just her knowledge, but her very right to exist in that space. Her backpack didn't just carry a medical journal. It carried the weight of reputation and the burden of proof that so many people face every single day. This story asks us a critical question. How often do we let our own biases blind us to the brilliance and value right in front of us? It's a call to look deeper, to listen more carefully, and to challenge the assumptions that live inside our own minds. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that challenge our perspectives. Let us know in the comments, have you ever been judged unfairly, only to prove everyone wrong? We want to hear your story.